Hi, and welcome to the Digging Deeper session of our 2019 WBARS annual reporting session. This is Lana K. Lip with the Washington State Housing Finance Commission. If you have questions regarding general WBARS operations, I encourage you to first watch the video done by Rebecca from Department of Commerce on Getting Started, where she walks you through all of the basic WBARS operations. In this Digging Deeper session, we're going to go over how to access reports from the dashboard, how to review an annual summary report looking for compliance issues, how to review Table 1 and the Excel export of Table 1, again, looking for possible compliance issues. We're going to find out how to spot them, how to fix them, and then how to go back and double check and make sure that everything's been corrected. And we're also going to quickly go through the submission process that Rebecca went through in more detail in her Getting Started section. Our tenant activity report, which is your Table 1. You can pull that from your dashboard. A reason to pull it from your dashboard versus pulling it from the projects page is if you have a property that has multiple sites. If you pull Table 1 from the projects page, you can only pull by site. If you pull from the dashboard page here, notice I can pick an individual site or I can pick all sites, and I will get one Table 1 with all of the information from the sites combined. I would just need to say what year I want, and I could go ahead and download the report. So just a note on that. On the project summary report, that's a really good place to see, okay, you have all your information in. What does it look like right now? How is my compliance looking at this point in time? And I am going to use Monroe Family Village today as our example. And so I'm going to look into 2019, and that's going to show me where I'm at. At this area, I could go view report, and my report will show up on the bottom of this page. When it pulls up in this location, note that there are these plus signs, and if you click on one of those plus signs, it will break things down. Typically it's by a bedroom breakdown, and so we can walk through and we could click all of those to see a little bit more expanded information and all of our bedroom sizes. Now note that the report goes through a project level summary, and then it goes through a site level summary. If there's only one site at the property, the site level summary should be an exact duplicate of the project level summary, but it won't always have all of the individual set-asides if the set-asides are set at a project level. Therefore, if you only have one site, please, when you're doing your review, use the project level summary report, and it will have a lot more information for you there. So this is the one for this property, and I worked with this a little bit already. So here's the annual summary report that I've already pulled up for this property, and I've already expanded all of the sections. So let's start looking at what you are going to need to look for. All of your funders that are in your property. There might be only one, there might be three like this property shows, or there could be more. It'll show you who the funder is. This stands for Department of Commerce, Snohomish County, and this is the Washington State Housing Finance Commission, where your tax credits are. Each of the funders lists how many units they show in the project, and then they show a breakdown of each requirement for each set-aside. So with this property, notice that we have a 30, 50, and 60% set aside. Commerce and Snohomish County are looking for the same things. They're looking for 23 units at 30%, don't care about the bedroom breakdown, and they're looking for 24 units at 50%, and again, they don't care about the bedroom breakdown. That varies slightly from what the commission is looking for. They're only requiring 20 units at 30%, 17 at 50%, and they allow for 10 units at 60. Of course, when you're doing compliance, you always have to make sure that you are in compliance with your most restrictive funder. So although the Commission allows for units at 60%, since the other funders do not, and they are requiring all 47 units at lower AMIs, you couldn't in actuality have 60% units at this property and still be in compliance with all of your funders. So how many units do we really need at 30%? We need 23. How many do we really need at 50? We need 24, and again, none at 60. The column over here in the far right, this draws from Table 1. So this tells you on Table 1, this property actually has 23 units slated at 30%. They have 20 units slated at 50%. And then they also have, as we keep going down the page, no common area units. They have one market rate unit. If a funder allows for market rate units, they don't actually show the numbers here because they're not quote unquote required. It's just your set-asides that are required. However, seeing this one here tells me there's probably something going on with this report because there's 47 units at the property and they're all required to be at 30 and 50. Therefore, there aren't really any allowables units left for market rate units. So that's something we'll want to look at when we review our Table 1. There's 3 vacant or empty units. And so what that looks like is okay at the 30%, short 4 at the 50% level, definitely okay at the 60. So where are those 4 units that we are missing at the 50% level? Well, we have that one at market, which may be an error, and we have 3 vacant units. Then if you have any specific special needs for the Commission, those will be below the line. And so what we're seeing here is, I'm sorry, I have this is skewed over here a little bit. This column is actually the Commission when I cut and pasted my pages together. You don't see that. But the Commissioner is requiring 5 units for households, for large households. The property has 5 units, so they're okay there, except one of those units, if you do the bedroom breakdown, we can see is actually a 2-bedroom unit, and the definition of large household does not allow a 2-bedroom unit to be designated. So we know that, there's something that we need to find on Table 1. When we continue down on that page, then we see for 3 bedrooms that they actually have 4 3-bedroom large households. So that's going to mean that they are short 1 due to that 2-bedroom being counted. And then we will look at the home set-asides. So home units are specific to a funder. On this property, it happens that they've received home money from the county. So the county is requiring 7 2-bedrooms and 4 3-bedrooms. The property has 6 2-bedrooms and 4 3-bedrooms, which means they're short 1 2-bedroom unit. However, when we look a little further, we see that they do have some units slated for the home program at the state level. State level would be Commerce, and Commerce is not requiring any home units. So a fix on this one is to redesignate this unit that was put in as a home state unit really should be a home county unit. And if we move that 1 unit up, that 1 2-bedroom, the property will then have the 7 units that are required. So this is the kind of thing that looking at the annual summary report will point out to you as far as corrections that need to be made on the Table 1. The part here about the National Housing Trust Fund program, Rebecca reviewed in the Getting Started session. It's a very specific program to Commerce, and not a lot of properties are using it. If Commerce is not requiring it, then you should not have any units marked as being in that program. So this one is actually looking good. Commerce doesn't require it, and there are no units slated under that program. Under the gray bar here, it will show special needs set-asides for funders other than the Housing Finance Commission. And you'll notice that it has requirements here. Okay, so Snohomish County is requiring 8 units for at-risk homelessness and 8 for homeless family head of household served. However, if you look at what's slated, you won't see any units slated there. And that's very typical. Unlike the information above the gray area that comes from Table 1, the area down here in this special needs, and it's pretty much denoted by having an additional area that talks about what your household set-asides are. The information from here pulls from Table 3. And it's very typical that you complete your Table 1, move to Table 2, and only then do you do Table 3. And so typically you will see all these as zeros until Table 3 is completed, and then you could come back here and you could double check these numbers. So that's our annual summary report and some of the issues that it is telling us about. So to get to our Table 1, again, we could pull it from here. Okay, we could pull it from this area, or we could go into projects. And I'm going to choose to go into projects, put in my property name, and when that comes up, I'm going to go to my reports. I'm going to pull my 2019, and right now I can see it's at the on-site manager level. That is the same level that I am signed in on, so I could make edits if I needed to. But when I click on that 2019, it will generate the tables. Table 1 is on the second tab from the right. And when I go to work with this table, I could look it at online. But I prefer to, when it comes to the point of checking my table, to do a download and go from there. So to do that download, we're just going to simply click on this download button that you're seeing here. When I click on that download button, my Excel export shows up here in the bottom corner. I click on that Excel export, and it is going to open Excel for me. That was fairly quick. This property isn't too large. It might take, a minute or so to generate if you have a very large property. So when I first pull this report up, you'll notice that there are, let me enable that editing for us. There are a lot of columns on this report. There is all of the information that appears on the resident record, and it plus information that doesn't even show up on the resident record, such as the submission level of the report. But please keep in mind, once you export your report to Excel, of course, it has all the features of a regular Excel document. So you can hide columns, you can hide rows, you can highlight columns if there's something that you want to look for, which would make it a little bit easier. So I have gone through, and I'm going to move away from this. I have gone through and created a version of the report where I've hidden columns just to make it a little bit easier to try to show you on the screen the information that you really need to check and verify. So at this point, if you didn't already download the Excel export and the list of Excel export errors that we're going to be looking at, I recommend that you pause and you go ahead and do that because we're going to go through 2 sheets. We're going to look at the Excel document on screen to see what the potential errors are, but then there's also a full listing of what the errors are, why it's showing up, and what you would do to fix it. So let's dive right into that Table 1 and see what kind of errors the system has generated. When we're going to just start going down, we're looking for bolding, we're looking for highlighting, we're looking for validations. Again, it's a little easier to see if you've already printed out the Excel export, but if not, I will try to point them out to you on the screen as well as I can. When we're cruising through and looking at the export, before we start individual line by line, one of the first things that I noticed when I started looking at this report is different units have different utility allowance sources. And if you see this on a property, the first thing you're going to want to do before you do a line-by-line review of your Table 1 export is to go and check your utility allowance setup. Utility allowances are set up by building, and we have a separate module that covers how you go in, how you can set them up by building, how you can do all-encompassing setup and for all of your buildings at once. And so you're going to want to pay attention to that. This property has two different sources, and actually there's a reason for that, and that is because they've gotten approved to use an alternate utility allowance, owner estimate, but they are still using the Section 8 allowances on units that have a project-based subsidy. And I could find that information or double check it. I'm scrolling across on line 1 where they were using Section 8, and I see that they are PBRA, project-based rental assistance, and that's why they're using it. I did notice, however, as I went through the report, that there were some units that are not project-based rental assistance, and they are using the Section 8 allowance. So you'll want to watch and make sure that you have a clean correlation between the utility allowance source that you're using and the reason that you're using it. Okay, so that was a general comment. Now let's go line by line. Looking at Unit A101. The first thing you'll notice is, we have a highlight here in our vacant column. Why is that highlighted? Well, because the unit was vacant for more than 90 days within the reporting period. Prior resident moved out March 31st. Next resident moved in September 10th, which is larger than a 90-day window. What this means for this property, first off is, you want to verify that your move-out date for the prior resident and the move-in date for the current resident are in fact correct. If they are, you need to explain the period of time that this unit was not occupied. You can use the comment section, which is way out to the right on this property. There weren't any comments, so I kind of shrunk the column down really small just to try to get all of the information on here that we wanted to see. But you can explain in comments for all of your funders. However, if you have Housing Finance Commission reporting to do, in addition, whenever there's a yellow here showing a vacant for longer than 90 days, we're going to request that you submit the extended vacancy rent ready report. And so you would submit that with your annual submission packet to the commission. So we had then the next person move into A101, and if you follow the lines across on your printed version, you'll be able to see there aren't any other highlights or validations, no bolding, so that's a good move in, assuming, of course, that is that 9/10/2019 is the correct move-in date. So I'm going to move to Unit A102. On A102, we see this highlighting on our certification dates. And if we scroll to the right to our validations, we will see it has a yellow validation saying the unit's current certification date is more than 12 months old. Okay, so we have a 2017 and a 2018 cert. The system is pointing out that we do not have a 2019 cert. To fix this, if the recert was done and was not put in the system, that would be a simple fix of processing a recert, which Rebecca went through in the Getting Started session, if you need to review how to do that. If the unit did in fact not have a recert done for the year 2019, you're going to want to go into the resident record. You're going to want to use that comments field, and you're going to want to explain why a recert was not done. And just know that that is going to be potential non-compliance on that unit. Next up, I'm going to continue down the page to Unit B204, and again I'm seeing a highlight on certification dates, and if I scroll to the right, the difference with this one is that I'm not seeing a validation. So this one has a 2017, 2018, but no 2019 certification, and that's why the system is highlighting. However, it's not giving the validation because the household moved out the month that the recertification was due. However, in actuality, if I really dig into this unit and I keep scrolling to the right, I can see that this household didn't actually move out. What they did is they transferred to another unit. They transferred to unit C102. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at unit C102. Okay, and it's a little difficult because the residents' names have been anonymized. So I had a resident ending in 993. In C102, this is where that resident transferred to. I have a move-out date of 11/30/2019, transferring into C102 the next day. A resident cannot be in 2 units on the same day. That's why it's the next day for this report. Notice that it pulls the information, or it would have pulled the 2017 and 2018 dates, but what happened in this case is the household was transferred and then their 2019 recertification was put into the system. What I would recommend is if a recert is due, you actually process the recert before you transfer the household, and then you wouldn't have these yellow highlights to work with because you would already have had a 2019 recert in the system. But this one was transferred first, then the recert was done, and when we scroll again way out to the right, we can see that corresponding transfer message that the household came from unit B204. And remember, you always want to process transfers in the system as a transfer versus a move-in and a move-out. If you're required to do Table 2 by your other funders, this makes it so the household's only counted once, not twice. For tax credit purposes, if you move an over-income household by move-out and then move-in, it's going to look like you moved in an over-income household, which would be a definite compliance issue. But if we can follow the transfer record and see that they transferred from one unit to another unit, then there would be no compliance issue. So that's one way to make it a little bit clearer and not get as many questions when your portfolio analyst at the commission reviews your Table 1 submission. So that was our transferred resident from B204 into C102. So I'm going to go back up to B204 where I was and continue on looking for possible issues. The next one that I see is in the very next unit. So in C101, I had a prior resident that had a 2017 cert date and then a 2018 cert date. Notice that they moved out in 2019 prior to when their recert was actually due. And if we look for a validation, we won't see a validation, just as this is not really an issue. It's a highlight just saying, hey, there's a no recert, but we look at that move out date and say, not an issue, we can move on. So the next unit I'm going to look at is C101, the next resident that moved into that unit. If we look at this unit, you're not going to see any highlights, you're not going to see any bolding, you're not going to see any validations. But remember that market unit that was showing up on our annual summary report? This is why. The unit designation for this resident, instead of restricted, was set at market rate. Given that it looks like they did a certification for 50%, they income, they rent qualify, most likely what's going on here is the unit designation was just put in incorrectly. And note, with having that 50% there, because it says market rate, the unit is counted as a market rate and not as a 50%. A fix for this one would be to go into the resident record, redesignate them to restricted, and then on the annual summary report, this unit would be counted as a 50% unit. And continuing down to look for additional issues, I'm going to get to D103. When I look at D103, it's another one of these. There's no validation, there's no highlights. If I go over, not really seeing any bolding, not seeing any issues, but this is one of those ones that you have to look really closely at, because what you see is this household moved in October 10th, 2019. There's no prior resident showing in this unit for 2019. So that either means that the unit was vacant from some time starting on the 2018 report going forward. And the one thing that the system doesn't do is it doesn't show you or highlight a vacancy period of 90 days or more when that period started in the prior year. So that's one that you just got to kind of look for. So this household or this unit either was vacant from the beginning of the year until October, which would require an explanation, and for the commission would require an extended vacancy rent ready report. Or it's possible that a resident, moved in January, moved out in June, and just didn't get put into the system. It's a little tricky to go back now and put them into the system, but it's not impossible. What you would actually have to do is you can't move somebody into a unit in WBARS when there's somebody currently living in the unit. So what you would actually have to do is go in, and not, of course, on the Excel export, but in the actual WBARS system, you would go in, you would have to enter a move-out date, and what I like to do is just put 1 day after their move-in. So if they moved in on 10/2, I would enter a move-out date of 10/3/2019. That makes the unit vacant. At that point, you can go and you can enter the prior resident that didn't get reported on. Note, you can only process a move-in in the current reporting year. So if they moved in 2018 and somehow they got typed over, they didn't come across in an upload, whatever the issue is, you would have to move them in as of 1/1/2019, fill in the information, and then in the comment field, explain and put their actual move-in date. If they moved in sometime later in 2019, then you can just use their actual 2019 move-in date. Put them in, put their certification in, put all their information, and put their correct move-out date. So that will make that resident insert on this report. Now you're not quite done, because the other thing you need to do is we would have entered a temporary move-out date for D103 for this current resident. You need to go in and you need to delete that move-out date. And then that will make them an active resident again. So again, a little tricky of a process, and if you need assistance with that, you can contact your portfolio analyst at the commission or your other representative at any other funder's office, and they can help you with that process. So that fills in our missing information on a tenant, or explains a long vacancy period. The next one down that I want to look at is E101. Notice we have a previous cert date missing. They moved in 2018. They processed a recert in 2019, but the issue is we're missing that 2018 certification date. In order to fix that, you would go into the resident record, and on the 2018 cert date field, you would want to put in that certification date, which should have been the move-in date of 7/27/2018. And then once you put that in, the system will no longer be looking for a missing certification. However, we're not done with that resident yet, because in addition to the previous cert date, we also see that the annual income bolded, which means it's over the income limit. It's also highlighted, which means it's over the income limit by 140%. And if we move to the validation section, we will see that validation. if this is a tax credit property that you're doing a report on, if a household goes over 140% on their first recert only, you are required to submit both the move-in certification and the first annual recertification with your annual report. For this resident, that would mean sending the 2018 move-in and the 2019 recertification. It is nice for your funders if you add a comment in the comments section on the resident screen, which would show up here on the Excel export, that explains why that household went over income by 140%. So for example, if there were 2 household members that move in and one had a job and one didn't, if you put, second household member obtained job and put the date, because we're looking at, was it, 2 days after move-in, or was there a period of time where the obtaining the new job couldn't have been expected. The other thing we'll see on this unit is we have a new column, income under or over the limit. And so this is just a calculation comparing the maximum annual household income with the income limit. If the number is negative, it means the household's income is less than the limit. If the number is positive, that means the household income is more than the limit. And if in instances where it's more than $10,000 over the limit in the first year, that's where we're also getting this highlight. Sometimes they'll be over 140. Sometimes a household can be 10,000 over the limit and not be over 140%. And we're going to look at one of those units a little bit further down the report. But that is a new column that's been added to the Excel export on WBARS 2.0. I am going to move my screen up for better viewing. For those of you that printed the Excel export, you will notice that we are moving to the second page of resident unit data, unit E102, or at least on my print selection, that took me to my second page. So we're continuing with E102. With E102, as we scroll over to the right, we will notice that they have a highlight for income, which means their income is over the limit. Please notice that they are a 2019 move-in, so that is going to be an issue. They are also, their rent with utility allowance is also over the limit. So the maximum allowed rent on this unit is $747. That would include that utility allowance. But the resident is actually paying over $1,200 and with the utility allowance included. So they are moved in over income, paying too much rent, and that is summarized in the validations for us. So what's our potential issue here? Well, they were moved in as a 30% household. One thing we would want to look for is, did they transfer from another unit? This household did not transfer. This is a new move-in. So the next thing I would look to is pull out their certification and see, should they really have been designated at 50%? And with this household, that is the case. So that would involve going back into the unit record and changing the restricted percentage from 30% to 50%. Of course, when you do that, you have to make sure that you have extra 30% units. When we looked through the annual summary report, this property had exactly the number of 30% units that they needed. So if we redesignate this one from 30 to 50, that means they're going to be short a 30% unit. They did have vacant units, so it could be that they're holding a vacant unit to rent to someone at 30%, or it's possible that they have another resident that is slated at 50% that actually qualifies at 30, and they could redesignate that unit down to a 30 so that they still meet the set-aside requirements. The next household that I'm going to look at is E201, and with this household, that's that highlight in that new column that I talked about, the income under or over the limit. This household moved in 2018. On their 2019 recert, their income is now $10,596 over the limit. That's not 140% of the limit, so that is not going to generate a validation issue. There's nothing there. However, if you report to the commission for your tax credits, when this happens, a household's income rises $10,000 or more above the limit at first recert. Just as with a 140% unit, we're going to ask that you submit the move-in certification and the first annual recertification so we can see what accounts for that large jump in income. As with households that go over 140%, it is appreciated by your funders if you enter into the comments area the reason for that large jump in income. Just helps explain things up front so you don't get as many questions once your annual report is reviewed. The next unit that I'm going to look at is E203. This is another one that doesn't have any bolding or any highlights. However, you will see there's a validation. This validation is specific to tax credits. It says the unit is too small to qualify for large household commitment. If you remember, when we looked at the annual summary report and the large household units that were designated, it showed that there was a 2-bedroom unit designated as a large household. The definition for a large household is 4 or more members in a 3-bedroom or larger. So the fix on this unit, since the unit is only a 2-bedroom and cannot be counted as a large household, would be to go back into the resident record in WBARS and remove the large household designation, and that will take that L out of the special needs and it will remove the validation. Of course, now that means the property is short one large household, and you'd have to look through the rest of the Excel table and see if there's another household that could in fact be designated as a large household to make up for that difference. So that was E203. Moving to E204. Another use of our income under or over the limit new column is only in the year that a household moved in. So this household moved in 2019. If the household moved in within $500 of the income limit, this will be highlighted. And if you report to the commission, what we are going to request is that you send us a copy of that move-in certification, just so we can double check that all income was calculated correctly, because they are so close to that income limit. So that new column has multiple uses for us. Next unit that I'm going to look at is F102. Again, I'm going to move my page up just to make it a little bit easier to view. And what we're seeing here is nothing yet. Keep going to the right. And this is another new column for us. Rent and utility allowance under over household monthly income. So what this column does is take the current annual gross income, divide it by 12 to get the monthly, and then compare that to what is the total rent and utility allowance for the unit. If it comes up negative, then this field is going to be highlighted. And what this is saying is this household does not have enough income reported for them to be able to pay their rent portion and cover their utility allowance. If we continue to move over to the right, one thing to check for is there subsidy? There's not for this household. Maybe there should be. Maybe the resident rent is not just showing their portion. Maybe there's a missing subsidy, and if the rent portion were correct for the resident, then they could afford to pay it. The other thing that we look for here is to keep moving to the comments column and see if there's any sort of explanation. So a couple of sample comments that I listed were resident has excluded financial aid. So, some type of income that's not being counted but is being used to pay for their expenses. Another sample comment might be resident is drawing on their checking or their savings account to help pay for their rent and necessities. Just something there that tells us how the resident's covering their expenses. If we're not seeing an explanation, it's most likely that when we do your annual report review, we are going to ask for one at that point in time. So moving to the next resident record where I see an issue, I'm going to move to F204. And in this one, we'll see income in bold, which of course means it's over the limit, but they've lived there since 2017, so that's not an issue for us. But if we keep moving to the right, I'm seeing a bolding, and so total rent with utility allowance is at $1,008, and the actual maximum allowable rent on this unit is $747. So we are seeing the highlight in this column due to the fact that they're being overcharged rent. Whenever I see this, I continue to look to the right, and there we're passing the validation, telling us that not only is the resident rent plus the utility allowance over the limit, but the annual income exceeds a home maximum as well. Since I am not an expert on home, I would tell you if you see that, you should call your home funder and ask them what does that mean at that point in time and how do you fix that home portion of that validation. For the over rent part, I'm continuing to the right, and I'm seeing that this household is on a Section 8 voucher that is providing a subsidy of $510. For the commission, if the resident is on a subsidy program, it is okay if their rent and utility allowance ends up being over the maximum rent limit. That's not true for all of your funders, so you definitely need to check with your funders and see if that is okay. In working with the Seattle Office of Housing, for example, I know that they are not okay with this and will require that any overage be paid back to the resident. So you definitely want to know what all your funders' policies are regarding this issue so that you can adjust accordingly as needed. The sections that we're going to get into now, the next couple of units, I want to point out some units for home. Again, the commission is not a home funder, so I am definitely not a home expert, but I do want to show you some things that the Excel export points out as potential home issues. Now, the home issues or the home columns are way to the right on this report, so bear with me. We're going to get way over here onto the right, and your home columns start here. So if there's a yes in the home is home unit column, that means the unit is designated as a home unit. And then there's some additional home fields, and they all have home specifically in the category. So all of those areas would need to be filled in if the unit is selected as home. So again, thinking back to that annual summary report that we looked at, and I pointed out that all of the home units on this property are required at the county level, and there was one reporting at the state level. This G201, this is the one that's reporting at the state level. Since there are no state home requirements for this property, the way to fix this one is to go into the resident record in WBARS and change the designation from home state to home county. The other thing I noticed with this one is the additional home fields. So the home unit occupancy, and if I continue to the right, the home race, type of household, and the ethnicity that was here, those are not filled in. So if you designate a unit as home, you need to fill in all of the applicable home fields. I'm going back to my units, and the next one that I'm going to look at is H102. This is also a home unit. This is currently a vacant unit, so that resident moved out. And when a resident moves out in home, there's a couple of designations that need to be changed. So although this was a renter as a home designation, once they move out, the home unit occupancy field needs to be changed to vacant. Another field that needs to be changed to vacant is the home type of household. I'm scrolling to get to that one. Type of household. So this was an elderly household, but at move out, that needs to be changed to vacant. So going into the resident record, adjusting both of those. If you can remember that when you move a resident out and they're in a home unit, to do those when you move them out, that would save you a lot of time. Continuing down, oh, look, I'm at the bottom of my report. So at this point, what I would say is you've identified the issues, go back into WBARS, correct all the issues, then you want to regenerate another Excel export and make sure that all of those issues that you fixed, that all of the highlights, the bolding, and the validations has either gone away or that you've entered a comment to explain it. Once your Excel export looks good, you also would want to go back and regenerate that annual summary report and see if you've taken care of the issues that were showing up there. Is it showing your property in compliance? And if it's not, is there something there that you need to explain to your funder in a report cover letter so that they're aware of an identified issue and how you expect to correct it? Before you're submitting your Table 1, everything looks good, keep in mind if you have to do Table 2 that you should check that table, and the things that generate from Table 1 forward to Table 2, that everything looks good as a good starting point for Table 2 before you go and you submit your Table 1. Of course, your Table 1 goes from on-site manager level, if someone was put in as the on-site, to a property manager, from the property manager to the owner, from the owner to the funder level. And only once it's reached the funder level is it considered completely submitted. If the commission is one of your funders, the WBARS submission is part of your reporting. You will also have to submit in hard copy form additional documentation to the commission. It is best if you enter data throughout the year rather than waiting till the end of the year, because as more people get into the system, we see more of a lag in the system, especially if you're importing. I know the thought is I'll just wait and import at the end of the year, but a lot of times when an import is done, there's some cleanup that needs to be done in your property software so that things import correctly, and it's a lot easier to do a couple of those a month if you see them when you do an import than it is to wait until the end of the year and then have to do your import and have lots of errors and corrections that need to be made. So that is our digging deeper section. Hopefully this will give you a good idea of how you should go about looking at your Excel export and your annual summary report as tools that can be used to give you the best submission that you can turn in to your funders. We all appreciate that, and I'm sure that you appreciate not getting as many questions when your funder looks at your annual report submission. So thank you for tuning into this session. If there were any of the processes that I talked about that you are not sure how to perform in WBARS, I encourage you to listen to any of our separate recordings on those issues so that you can perform those functions. Thank you.